Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of Happiness in Higher Ed podcast. My name is John Hill. My pronouns are he, him, and I have a special guest tonight, my former roommate from Illinois. When we went to grad school at Western Illinois University, we have Cecilia Langill. And before I introduce her, I just want to read off our mission statement, and it is, in a world that can be engulfed in darkness, we must shine bright and lead the charge for a better future. As we continue to shape and challenge emerging adults' minds, it is also our duty to reflect and remember what makes us happy and why we continue to do the work that we do. So, without further ado, my guest again is Cecilia Langill. And Cecilia Langill is a student engagement coordinator in the Faculty of Science at the University of British Columbia. International. It's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome. She is passionate about connecting with students and empowering them to uncover their individual leadership styles. Cecilia currently lives in Vancouver, British Columbia, and has thoroughly enjoyed getting outside and exploring the beaches, forests, and mountains in the backyard. Cecilia, would you like to elaborate on that a little bit?
Um, First of all, hi John. So great to be here. I'm really excited to be a guest on your podcast today. The only thing I want to elaborate on is for those of you who are not familiar with Vancouver, I live on the western side of Canada. I live right on the water. And Vancouver is one of the most beautiful places on this earth, and I'm so grateful that my career has brought me here. So.
Yes, and I can definitely attest to the fact that her Instagram pictures are amazing. Because I feel like it's either every single day, it's either a picture of some trees out and about or the ocean, which of course, every day is different. Those sunset pictures though are amazing.
That's where I'll be going after this.
Nice. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump into the questions. So here we go. So first question, what was the reason you started to pursue a career in higher education?
Yeah, that's a good starting point. So I went to the University of Calgary. I have my bachelor's degree in communications from there. And when I went to university, when I started in my first year, all of my friends from high school had gone to different universities. And so I went from being a very big fish in a small pond to being a very, very small fish in a big pond. I didn't know a lot of people. I didn't have a lot of connections. I felt really, really lost. I was very confused about what I wanted to do with my life. And I figured the best way to get a sense of who I was, the best way to get a sense of the community was to get involved in it. And so I was actually really inspired by my sister. I don't know if I've ever told you that, but my sister was really involved as a student. I saw her being happy and successful as an involved student, and I figured I would get involved as well. So I joined a lot of different clubs. I started working for the university. I worked for the Students' Union. I worked for our orientation programming. I created a club with some friends that became a not-for-profit at one point. And I felt so fulfilled in the work that I was doing outside of the classroom. And I felt like I learned so much more through the experiences that I was having than through my academic experience. So I paid a lot to go to class, but I got rewarded in what I learned outside of the classroom. Mm-hmm. And through this journey, there were a number of professional staff that I had the chance to work with who had careers in higher education, and they had gone on and got their master's degree. And I was so inspired by them and so excited about the possibility of continuing this work as a career. And so shout out to Jen Quinn and Terry Jones from the University of Calgary. They're the number one gals who inspired me to get on this path. So yeah, I just felt very fulfilled in that, and I felt really excited about the possibility of working with people. And so that kind of brought me to where I am today in my career.
Got you. Nice. And so you did your undergrad in Canada, and then you came to the United States and did your master's at Western Illinois University in the College Student Personnel program of, once again, roommates. Awesome people. I'm not, I'm just trying to say that for myself at least. But can you speak a little bit about that? Like, what was that transition like in terms of, because I know that you had worked a little bit. I remember, if I remember correctly, it was 2 years you had worked at
the University of Alberta in Edmonton.
Yes, I was going to say in Canada, but that makes it more specific. Thank you. And then had made that transition to go to grad school, and then now you're working back in Canada. So can you just speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. When I went to grad school, again, I was inspired by some very specific folks at the University of Calgary, and both of those women had experiences at Western Illinois University. And so that's actually the exact reason why I went to that specific grad school, is because the people that inspired me had an excellent experience at that university, and I wanted to as closely mirror their experience up to that point as possible. So I chose to go that route. But also, there's a pretty, from my experience, there's a pretty significant difference between the education systems in Canada and in the United States. And there's a pretty significant difference in the way that student affairs is thought of in the Canadian context versus in the American context. And there's a lot more opportunity for academic pursuit from a student affairs lens in the United States. And so it made more sense to me to get my degree in the American context versus the Canadian context, because there was just more opportunity in the US. And so it was a really excellent experience. It was a very hard experience. I would absolutely do it over again in the blink of an eye if I had the opportunity, because I learned so much about myself. I learned so much about the US. For any Canadian listeners, you know that a lot of our media is American, a lot of our news is American. And so I went in with a pretty decent understanding of the country, but I learned so much more about the people and the issues that face both the US and Canada as a component of living in the US. And so, yeah, I learned so much, not just about student affairs, but about the world and myself as a person. And yeah, it was a great opportunity. The people of Illinois are very wonderful. And the people I met there are just changed my life forever, including you, John. So,
Got you. I wasn't going to take credit for it on the podcast, but I'll definitely take credit since you said something.
Other words too.
Got you. Thank you for sharing that. And on to the next question. We have, what makes you happy? So thinking about one thing that's from higher ed, and then one personal thing.
Oh my gosh, what makes me happy? A lot of things make me happy. I spoke a little bit earlier about Vancouver, the city that I live in. And one of my favorite things to do is be outside. I love being not just in nature, but around other people, which has been very hard in the pandemic. But I love having the chance to go outside, to explore the community that I live in, and to be part of something bigger than myself. And I think the easiest way to do that is to step out of my front door. And so something that makes me happy outside of higher ed is just getting involved in the world around me. And so I've really had a great opportunity to do so in Vancouver, because there's so much that I have the opportunity to do that's right outside my door. I mean, I'm sitting at my desk right now, and I can see a beautiful park called Pacific Spirit Regional Park. It's full of massive redwood trees. So I love going out there. I live 10 minutes away from one of the most beautiful beaches in Canada, so I go there all the time. So that definitely the world around me brings me happiness. When it comes to higher ed and thinking about my job specifically, I get to work with so many amazing people. And I say this to people all the time. Those that work in higher education and student affairs are some of the best people in the world. And I very much hold true to that. I have some excellent colleagues who have made my transition to my job seamless. I work with incredible students who bring so much passion and interest and humanness to the work that I do. And so those people that I get to work with make me happy every single day.
Nice. And you were in the thing that I found interesting about what you were talking about is that humanness piece. And I think that's such a good thing, because I think that's the difference that I've seen between higher education and other jobs that you could possibly go for, is that I think that it's a very humbling experience, because I think that we give each other, if we don't give each other, we should give each other more grace, in the sense that, we are doing extremely wonderful work, but it's laboring. Sometimes it's not a manual labor task, but it's a lot of thinking and sitting there and using, looking at data points and looking at other things. So it's not, you could spend 4 hours looking at one document, but it just, so much is turning, the wheels are turning all the time. Yeah. And I think that's such a key thing to think about, is that humanness, and also giving that to our students that we work with, because they're also going through a lot. They're multidimensional just as much as we're multidimensional. So
yeah. And if I can just kind of go off what you said, John, I think a lot about the work that I do too, and I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with this. It's a lot of emotional work. And the emotional piece, I think, has been amplified by the pandemic. I've spent so much time over the last year in my job, crazy that it's been almost a year, thinking about how to support my students emotionally, how to support myself emotionally, how to make sure that everyone's getting the experience that they're looking for in a virtual environment. And so you're right, there is a lot of mental work, but there's also a lot of emotional pieces that come into it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that leads us perfectly into our next question. So what keeps you resilient in the face of some of the challenges you faced so far? Whether that be like budget cuts, stress of the pandemic, like how you had just said that you had literally moved, not only moved back to Canada, but then moved to Vancouver. So
what keeps me resilient? I think for those of you who have done Strengths Finder, one of my top strengths is connectedness. And to me, having a strength in connectedness means knowing that I am always connected to other people. I'm always connected to other things. And through that, I truly believe that I'm never alone. That there will always be people who are there for me to support me when I'm going through something challenging. And so I think what keeps me resilient, especially over the course of this pandemic, is knowing that I have an excellent community around me who will support me in my most challenging times, not just folks in my personal life, but folks in my professional life who will be there for me when I need them.
mm-hmm.
And knowing that those people will always treat me like I'm a human being. That really helps me maintain my resiliency, because I know that, especially in my work life, I'm not just a worker. I'm not just an employee ID. I'm a person, and the people that I work with know that, and I try and bring that into my work as well, as letting my students know that they're people. And so that humanness of this work definitely contributes to my resiliency, and knowing that even though sometimes I can feel lonely because I work from home, I've actually never met the majority of my colleagues in person. I see them on Zoom in the mornings, but I spend a lot of time alone, but I know that I'm not alone. And I know that I'm connected with those folks in various different components of my life.
Got you. Nice. No, I think that's something that's amazing to have, especially in this moment that, as you're talking about the pandemic and, getting that connection with other people, through a screen is challenging, but if you have the ability to do that, it just makes it so much better, and makes you feel heard, feel seen. And, also, as you were talking about specifically, that you're not just you're not just an employee ID number. You're not just, in this position, or the person that's filling this position. You are Cecilia in this position. So it's that person first that is so crucial. So
yeah. And I would say, just to continue answering this question, I think there's a lot of things that keep me resilient. One of the things that has been most inspiring to me over this year, when I'm thinking about human connection and like forming communities and things like that, I have the pleasure, the privilege of working with a student organization called the selfcare Academic Coaches. And this is a group of 26 senior student leaders that I meet with. I over the academic year have met with on a very consistent basis. And when they got hired into their roles in 2020, before the pandemic happened, they didn't know that we were going to be doing things virtually. They thought we were going to be meeting in person and all of that was going to be happening per the usual. And then obviously we moved online when the pandemic happened, and these students had to experience this student leadership opportunity through their computer screen. And I was very interested at the beginning of that to see how that the virtual nature of it would impact the community building that was able to happen. And I am so inspired by the students' willingness to engage in community and community building through their screens. It definitely, the pandemic and the virtual nature of it did not hinder the opportunity to form community. It slowed it down for sure, but it did not hinder it. Those students sought that community and brought their all every week to build that community, and to see their resilience in the virtual space definitely inspired me and contributed to my own sense of resiliency.
And I was talking to Janessa about this specifically, of that, like, I think that resilience is kind of like something that's interconnected. So like you can gain a different lens or a different feeling of resiliency when you look at other individuals and how resilient they were. Yeah. So it's kind of like you're seeing it through their experience when they're telling it to you. And you kind of, I mean, if you were like looking, this is a bad example, but like if you were looking at like a phone battery, if your resilience is at like 50%, you gain a little bit, because you're like I had said specifically in that episode, as I was saying, that they're sitting in front of you and they went through this traumatic event, they went through this experience that made them different, but were resilient in a sense that they bounced back and they're sitting in front of you, and you're like, that's a huge accomplishment, especially when you go to college and you have that feeling of you might have a sense of who you are, but you're still trying to define that who you are. And if you move really far away, it's a different experience. So I think it's awesome that you have the ability to fill your own resiliency cup up, I guess, is the way that I would describe that. So that's awesome. That your students sound amazing.
Very much.
So yeah. So on to the next thing. Now that we talked about resiliency a little bit, so what are some of the ways that you practice self-care to stay on your A game?
This is a really interesting question because I think that self-care can be defined in a lot of different ways. One of the things that I've tried to prioritize in my adult life is taking care of my physical well-being. And this, sometimes it's hard, and sometimes it doesn't feel like care to get up at 7 a.m. and go to the gym, or to eat a salad, or do some of those unpleasurable things. But at the end of the day, I think that when I am physically healthy, I'm mentally healthy. For me, they're very, very interconnected. And so when I practice self-care, I think about setting boundaries in my life that allow me to take care of myself physically. And something that I've really struggled with when I work at home is actually taking a lunch break. That can be really hard because my computer is in my apartment, my couch is there, my bed is there, my kitchen is here. You can kind of see it in the background. And it can be really hard to set those physical and like mental boundaries between the various different components of my life. And so I've worked really hard to try and step away from my computer at lunchtime, to go for my daily walk, to get out and see the sun and breathe the air and remember that I'm not the only one in this world. And so, yeah, I think sometimes, like I said earlier, self-care doesn't feel like self-care. Sometimes it can be really hard to go out for a walk or go to the gym or eat right or do those things. But I know in the long run, they'll make me happy. And I know that I need to continue to set those boundaries for myself for the longevity of my mental health. So I definitely hard to prioritize.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you bring up like the boundary setting in terms of self-care, because I think that more times than not, we think of the self-care aspect of like the treat yourself, going out and like doing these lavish things for yourself. But like you had just mentioned, some of them could just be like, all right, I'm going to get up. It's 12 o'clock or whatever time I take a lunch. I'm going to get up. I'm going to go to the kitchen, make my lunch, eat said lunch, take some time for myself, and then go back to work. And then, hopefully, like you said that you're going to do tonight, is you're going to go out and experience the sunshine, the fresh air, the sunshine, and, recharge, I think that's awesome.
Well, and I think to your point, John, about self-care, sometimes being presented as a very lavish thing. One of the things that comes with that is the financial component of self-care. And for me, when I think about financial self-care, I think about, how do I save my money? How do I not make sure I'm not making unnecessarily expensive purchases? Because again, for my Canadian listeners, that Vancouver has an incredibly high cost of living, and it's a very, very expensive place to live. It's beautiful and it's worth every penny, but it's very expensive. And so for me, self-care looks like making very conscious financial choices as well. So that's been an interesting thing to have to adapt to living in this new city, and having not just a grad school budget, but having a professional staff budget.
Well, yeah, I think it's funny because when I did a presentation for Western Illinois University in the CSP program, I did it on financial wellness, and that was one of the questions that was brought up is like, what is it like to be making money, after grad school? Because, we were only making, I want to say, close to like $850 a month, depending upon how you did it, if you taxes or whatever. But you're only making $850, and like now you're out making more money. But like you had said, and like what I had mentioned in that presentation specifically, is that, like our rent was, anyone that lives in Macomb, you are awesome. $310 for a 3-bedroom apartment for 3 people was amazing. But now my apartment here, like with everything included, is close to 900. So it's times 3. So I'm making 3 times the money, but I'm also spending 3 times the money for certain things. So I think that's the one thing that we kind of have those rose-colored glasses when we think like, oh, we're gonna get out of grad school. It's gonna be so much money everywhere. And don't get me wrong, I now have the ability to I treat myself every once in a while, but it kind of goes back to what you were talking about, is being conscious of, things are more expensive, especially like, rent and things, and saying that, okay, I'm going to buy this thing now and then give myself some time to save more money if I want to buy something else new, not necessarily just buying everything that you want, so.
Yeah. And there's definitely a learning process that goes with that for sure. And I think that I'm definitely still in the learning of that, but it's getting easier.
True. But so for the final question that I have for you is, what is one piece of advice you live by in your practice?
Yes. So you had sent me these questions in advance, and I spent a bit of time actually thinking about this one. And I have a sign on my desk, which I'll show you in a second. But one of my professors from grad school, Dr. Layla McLeod, always used to say this. And then one day I happened to be in a shop in Denver, Colorado, when I was on a service learning trip with a group of students in grad school. And I found a sign that said exactly what she used to say. But the sign says, "Be curious, not judgmental." And I think this is one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten in my life. And to me, the statement, "Be curious, not judgmental," means when I interact with things that don't make sense to me, instead of coming from a place of judgment and intentional misunderstanding, I change my mindset to come from a place of curiosity and wonder and interest. And I think, especially in the type of work that I do, I have the chance, the privilege to interact with a lot of people who are different than I am. And with that comes different worldviews, different perspectives, different values, etc. And so in being curious, not judgmental, I remind myself that it's okay that people have different opinions than mine. And I need to be curious and come from a place of wonder when I'm interacting with those folks, rather than a place of judgment. Because I have the potential to learn something from everybody. And if I come from a place of judgment, I immediately shut down my interest in learning from them. And so I think this expands not just in my professional life, but also in my personal life. And I am so grateful that I found that sign in a random store. And I'm so grateful to Dr. McLeod for instilling that piece of advice onto me, because I think it is very impactful and definitely has shaped the way that I am today.
Got you. And when you were talking about that, the be curious, not judgmental, the thing that I thought of was seeking to understand rather than seeking to know. Yep. That's exactly what I thought of, because like the understanding piece is kind of like building that connection that you had talked about, being that connectedness with someone, and trying to dive deeper, and not necessarily just for yourself, but how that can build upon in your life, your practice, your work, anything that you're doing. But if you're just seeking to know and to check off a box, then it's kind of like, are you paying attention to what they're saying and how it impacts them, and how that impacts the way that they navigate the world and how they see the world, and I think that quote there, or that sign, honestly, the sign's cool. The sign is super cool. For everyone that's on Spotify, the sign is awesome. But I think that's like you had said, it's such a wonderful piece of advice, and something to keep in the back of your mind. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think just on that note, it's really easy to make assumptions about people. It's really easy to think that I know why someone's behaving the way that they are. And when I think about being curious, it reminds me to set aside my assumptions about them, because the way that what I know about people is 0.001% about who they actually are. And when I'm curious and ask good questions, then I have the opportunity to get to know that person that might be different and will likely be different from my own assumptions about them.
Mm-hmm. And I think to what you just said too, like I think that's like reminds me of like Brene Brown, when like that drives disconnection rather than connection.
Yes.
And that's the one thing you don't want, because the more that you make those judgments and those assumptions, the more that you're distancing yourself from them. Like I said earlier, we're all multidimensional. We all have things going on in our lives. You could see, I had mentioned Tracy Davis, Dr. Tracy Davis last week with Chase, but I think when he talked about the masks that we live in and, putting on a performance, like, I think that's such a thing that you don't necessarily know what's going on behind closed doors, because some of us, and myself included, I did it for a long time, just keep, put on a great face, smile, and everything. No one will ask any questions, so.
Yeah. Well, and speaking about Dr. Davis, our friend Tracy, one of the things that Tracy used to say as well is be very slow to what was it? Be very slow to judge the color of one's soul, or something like that. And I think that's also a very beautiful reminder to take time to get to know people and remember that people are a very small part of who they present themselves to be. So both of those professors really impacted my approach to my work and my approach to my life.
The same. That's all I'm gonna say. Is same. But no, thank you. I cannot thank you enough for being a part of the podcast. I appreciate you, and just for our viewers at home to know that our next guest for episode 5 will be Nat Betancourt Aureliano. I hope I'm saying that right. Nat will probably either correct me or say that I did a great job when I said that. But don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube, as well as listen to us on Spotify. All you have to do is just search Happiness in Higher Ed, and you should find the podcast. But Cecilia Langill, thank you very much. And once again, I appreciate you for doing this. So.
And thanks for having me. It's been an awesome experience, to be honest, and get to see you again. John and I live very, very far away, and with the borders closed, I don't know the next time I'm going to get to see him. So getting to connect virtually is always a pleasure. So thanks for having me.
Yes, especially since we saw each other literally every day for 2 years.
Now it's been more than a year, which is the most wild thing ever. But anyways, that's a side conversation.
But yes, so I hope everyone has a great rest of their night, and thank you for listening.